Don't worry guys, I refrained from putting in a dumb food pun in the title like The Bear Season 3 Cooks, but this season is pure excellence that maintains the high bar set from Season 2. And if you haven't watched the previous seasons, then the show is basically like a delicious hot pot of complex characters, riveting conflict that infuses every nanosecond with immense stress, great cinematography that brings so much beauty to this otherwise anxiety-driven show, immaculate and detailed editing, expert directing, and top-tier acting. From a technical standpoint, this show is basically perfect, and the writing is also constantly popping off. With the combination of the great directing and editing, the writing comes across as this brilliantly orchestrated chaos. Like in episode 2 when Carmy is showing off his new non-negotiables, the entire episode becomes a Mad Max Fury Road of dialogue, where it's a constant rush of characters quickly bantering between each other. But the way it's directed and edited feels so deliberate, as every micro moment is captured, and that in turn makes the scene incredibly engaging. It explores and balances multiple perspectives, has heavy and raw emotion, and the dialogue is fierce and also funny. This is essentially the main allure of The Bear, in that these fast-paced scenes are densely packed with so many rich and small moments, while also lasting for a long duration. And since it lasts for a long time, they also keep stacking more and more elements into a scene that in turn increases the anxiety. Like for episode 2, it evolves from a discussion between two characters, and it slowly becomes more heated with the introduction of additional people. This evolution also keeps the entire lengthy scene fresh, since it's constantly layering in new dynamics. It quickly establishes the perspectives and opinions of every character, and with this fast pace, it also increases the tense atmosphere. Also, it's worth noting how clever the cinematography is here in that they predominantly use close-ups to keep the scene more tense and claustrophobic, while also focusing on the raw emotions of each character. This, in essence, is why The Bear is so brilliant. And given that we're at a point in the story now where they're running a proper restaurant, it creates a lot of high-stress and conflict-motivated scenes. And it's not like that wasn't the case in the earlier seasons, obviously, because that's been a constant, but Season 3 is arguably at a point in the overall show that we as an audience have been looking forward to the most. And the execution of the story here of running the restaurant unfolds really well. Like Carmy's conditions imbue the entire plot with even more conflict on top of just running a profitable business that tries to run smoothly. Carmy wants this to be a top-tier restaurant, and whether or not everyone is ready to actually accomplish that goal is what makes the season so captivating. Now, looking at the overall season, there's actually quite a bit of detour/flashback episodes. I don't think Season 3 necessarily hits the absolute heavenly highs of Forks and Spoons from Season 2, but there are still some incredible standout episodes. Like the season opens with my personal favorite of Season 3, in which we see Carmy's extensive culinary background. And the reason why it's my favorite is the presentation of this episode. Normally, flashbacks are done in a boring manner that is predominantly used to throw a bunch of exposition at you. While here, this episode is basically an entire beautiful non-linear montage that just shows you what Carmy has gone through. They don't really call attention to it, but what really stuck with me was how conjoined the style of this episode was with Carmy's realization that he needs to subtract from his dishes. In essence, this episode takes that philosophy into a technical standpoint and subtracts a lot of dialogue and just shows us a breathtaking montage, which to me was insanely clever, and I've never really seen this done before in terms of matching the presentation of the story with a core lesson from the episode. Then some other standout aspects are the cinematography being gorgeous as always, the music establishing a wonderful serene tone, and the way Carmy's upbringing is balanced and contrasted between trauma and joy and inspiration, I thought was brilliant. It really highlights and develops Carmy's character to a point that we can really understand why he's pushing the restaurant to a breaking point this season. Because without this crucial episode, Carmy would come across as an unsympathetic villain. But because we saw this extensive backstory, it makes his character significantly more understandable. And in general, the way he's written is so interesting this season because we can see the subtle ways his different mentors have imprinted on him. Like why he's so mentally unstable and quick to anger, and why he's so driven and motivated. Since Carmi's character is being fully exposed, the way that now affects the surrounding characters and changes their dynamics with him is also a great evolution for the writing. And of course, the way Season 2 ends was also brilliant in that it acts as the catalyst for a lot of great arcs for Season 3. But going back to the overall detour and flashback episodes, I find it pretty crazy that these episodes are actually some of the best that the Bear offers, because normally these filler-esque episodes just pad out time in other shows, while here, it's used to fully flesh out characters or certain dynamics. Like another standout was Napkins, in which we get to see Tina's backstory. Initially, I didn't find her character that interesting, but Ayo Idibri, who also did a great job directing this episode, imbues her character with so much warmth, willpower, and she genuinely wants to do her best. She goes from someone who was kind of just there and was turned into a fully detailed character in 30 minutes. While also having a great and long dialogue scene with another character who we haven't seen much of. Like the first episode, Napkins is also kind of a montage of sorts, and I think this was paced wonderfully and edited really well, on top of having some great commentary on the hiring process. Like how crazy it is that someone with so much experience can be completely overshadowed by someone with no experience, but has a shiny degree that put them into financial debt. The other Detour episode is definitely great, and features some award-worthy acting. But since quite a bit of the season is distracted from the main plot of the restaurant succeeding, the ending because of this feels a little underwhelming in terms of plot progression. This is really the only small flaw I have with Season 3 because it feels like half of a season. What I mean by this is that a lot of the established plot threads don't have a natural conclusion, and are all essentially at their halfway point narratively. This may not be as much of an issue for some people, but the story kind of just feels incomplete and unresolved for Season 3, which you can argue is the whole point of seasons of television, but generally, each season will have a point of resolution for a plot thread that then reforms and changes the status quo of the story to make the next season more interesting. But again, this isn't a major flaw or anything, and a lot of the side stuff we received was excellent and was worth the time. It just feels like this season needed an additional 2 or 3 episodes to actually finish the arc that it initiated. There was a lot more emphasis on character work this time around, which I think is pretty essential, and you can never really go wrong with, honestly. Then, one of the main highlight episodes that isn't a flashback is Doors. This was just your typical Bear utter chaos episode that we just love to see, and the reason why these episodes are so great is because it's like we're watching a mastermind orchestrator construct this episode. Every aspect of production is so detailed in terms of its placement and what is conveyed to the viewer. Its relentless pace keeps a strong grip on the audience, and it's just a non-stop ride of adrenaline throughout. It's also interesting how the season in general balances these high-stress episodes with the more low-key ones. It's kind of like this graph, and I think it's clever how the creators try not to burn out the audience by having a more natural flow between the calm and the storm. Because we could theoretically have a bunch of high-stress and fast-paced episodes, but I feel like that would kind of burn out the audience. That's why Season 2 essentially setting the foundation of having the more relaxing episodes is so important, and Season 3 expertly expands on that front. Then, I feel like the most influential aspect of production that essentially makes The Bear what it is the editing. I personally went into film school wanting to become an editor and took a lot of classes for that, and the editing in the show blows me away. It's purely head-spinning the amount of edits that go into each fast-paced scene, and I'm curious how much footage they're pulling from for each of these cutaways. Because I assume the vast majority of these cuts are predominantly driven by the editor instead of being planned. Like, just watch this one moment from Doors.
I need my ravioli, I need my rib cap. Guys, where is my rib cap? Guys, please, chefs, I need communication. Where are we at?
Instead of the editor holding on a shot of Sydney becoming annoyed by the orders not being fulfilled, the editor keeps cutting away to a barrage of orders building up. It instills so much more stress and chaos into this moment, and this is just one microscopic detail in a massive ocean of brilliance. This kind of example is happening at all times during The Bear, or at least during its more fast-paced segments. And as someone who appreciates good editing, the show is a feast for me. Also, even during the first episode, which is more relaxing, the editor opts for a more ethereal tone of beauty in which they overlay and cross-dissolve different shots. Like, truly, this has been the most floored I've ever been by the editing in a show or movie, and watching the show just for that aspect alone is worth it, let alone everything else. Then then I'll go into one more aspect, because I could honestly just gush endlessly and go into extreme detail about the show, but I don't have enough time to make another massive video essay, unfortunately. And the aspect of note is the dialogue. The Bear has some of the most real, fast-paced, explosive, witty, and funny dialogue. And sometimes the dialogue can embody all of those characteristics at the same time. Like Ice Chips as an example is literally just 40 minutes of straight dialogue, and it was wholly captivating. It simultaneously conveyed a lot of dramatic weight and humor through its dialogue, which is really hard to do. I would love to go into more detail about the episode, but there's a major aspect about it that would be a spoiler if I talked about it. But yeah, it's crazy to me for a show that's predominantly visual based in terms of flashy editing and cinematography, also manages to have top tier dialogue. And the way it's written in some scenes is just crazy from a script writing standpoint of having so many characters talk at once. But yet, it still comes across as being coherent. The Bear in general is really just an outstanding showcase for every aspect of production, and I know this is sounding more like an overall series review, but to be fair, this is my first Bear video, and I do regret not making a season 2 review last year, especially since Forks is one of the best episodes of television, period. But season 3 still manages to be the absolute peak of television, and honestly, this is probably the best show currently airing, given that Succession and Better Call Saul have ended. Thank you for watching, and my Letterboxd, Patreon, and Discord links are in the description. Thank you immensely to Logan Farmer, my top patron, for being truly amazing.